What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Enter the Matrix with myself, Anthony, and my co-host, Typhus. We've got Josh Roberts from the English team with us today. He's going to be going over the WTC experience from his point of view. He is a blooded vet. He's been in the game for a long time, from what I understand.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, we're going to go through everything. So, Josh, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us what you're about, where you're at, how long you've played, why you still play, all that good stuff.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've been involved now when it was the ETC, and now it's become obviously the WTC. But I've been involved. First year I went was Munster, Germany, when it was in the ice ring. So how long ago was that, Typhus? That was
11 or 10th.
10
Oh,
years,
my.
maybe. So
No, I think it was 2011.
yeah, maybe, yeah.
Wow.
I know we did it there twice at Munster, so I can't remember which one, but
Yeah.
I went to the first one there. So I've been doing it a long time now. And then I've been captain for England for all but one of those years. So the first year I went, I wasn't a captain. Then after that, my first year at captaincy was when we were in Switzerland. And then I've been captain ever since from that.
That's amazing. That's a really long run as captain.
If you were at first Munster, it actually means you started in 2009 then.
Yes, yeah.
Which is crazy when you think about it. Like, next year's WTC would be like 14th year for you?
Yes, it would be, yeah. Yeah, I've not...
Like half of your life, at least?
Nearly, yeah. I mean, I'm 32, so not quite half my life, but
okay.
not far off, yes, yeah. But I've been playing 40k since I was 12, so it's been a long time. So I've been involved in the hobby for ages, really.
Okay, so actually for me this is really interesting now that we have somebody on the podcast that has longer seniority than I do, which you do not really see. I think like, what's your experience, Josh? But like, there are usually in every team like few veterans, but then you have like, for example, 2-3 people in every team, but then the rest just rotates every year, right? I think that was a common thing for UK as well.
Yeah, so I mean, you mean as in like regular players and then new players coming in?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a balancing act, isn't it? Because you don't want to become, I don't know what the saying would be in Poland or America, but in England you would say you don't want to become a boys' club where it's just the same mates always going together, because that stagnates. You don't get the competition for places in the same way. If somebody thinks, oh, I'm definitely on the team, then do they put as much practice in? Do they put as much effort into list building, testing? So you have to try and find a balance between encouraging competition and getting new players involved. And as I mean, I've been doing it a long time now. As editions change, that also changes who's interested in the game and who's serious about 40k. I mean, some people loved, say, 5th edition, and then when it changed to 6th, they were like, no, don't like this. We certainly saw that when it went from 7th to 8th. There was a huge change. So again, there was a lot of players in the UK that didn't like the change to 8th and just stopped from a competitive standpoint anyway. Maybe they went to play other games, X-Wing or Legion, etc. So there's definitely always that side. But the other side is, and I'm as you guys both know, you've been to the WTC before, nothing really compares to the WTC. Like, even if you play loads of singles events, the mindset change and just understanding how the gaming works, it's just a different experience. You are like, win-loss is not, it's not a win-loss event anymore. It's a sliding scale. People will play differently to you. Oh, this game I comfortably win in singles. Yeah, but they're not trying to win now. They're just trying to get points. It's a completely different setup. So I find often we try and encourage new players every year. I think we've always had at least 1 or 2 new players every year because of the change and because of people, as I said, additions and people's interest in the game. But always they need the most managing, because they don't. You can sort of try and explain how the WTC works, but until they've actually been there and they've actually then played in a team event in that environment, then they go, oh, okay, this is what I get it now. So that being a veteran, gives you a big advantage. If you're still serious about the game and reapplying, you have that ace up your sleeve, if you will, that because you understand how the WTC works, I don't have to explain that to you, and you get it in list building and pairing matrices and stuff. Whereas a new player doesn't get that. Okay, my list doesn't need to be all comers. You have to explain so much more to them. So it's a real balancing act between new players and continually having that competition, because if you have more players competing for spaces, it ups everybody's game. But then on the other side, that veteran ability is just so strong within the WTC, because there is other team events out there, but none are really at the same level and intricacy as something like the WTC. So only by going do you really understand how much more or complex, or however you want to call it, there is to that team setup than, say, a single event that you just rock up to.
And also, there's one more thing that I would like to add on to it, that when we were choosing like new players, there's a thing about pressure that you cannot kind of measure in any way until they arrive and play at the event. Some people will crumble when they lose games that they should win, and their mental state would just falter for the remainder of the event. And that's another thing, that those veterans are actually like more valuable because they will not falter.
Yes, I agree with that 100%, because I've definitely experienced that before, where you've had very good singles players that have played for us, and as you say, they go into a matchup very confident. The opposing player, even if they don't necessarily lose the game, but they go into that game thinking, in singles games, because the other opponent, it's a win-loss, they're going to chase the win as well. They might as well. It doesn't matter if they lose 99-30 or they lose 99-98. It doesn't matter, really, in a win-loss draw system in a lot of ways. Whereas at the WDC, a 20-0 or an 11-9 or a 10-10 is a huge swing. And I've had that before, where players who've gone in super confident, I win this game, and then the opposing player plays for the draw or plays for a minor loss, gets a 9 or something like that, and they just don't understand, like, what happened. How did I not smash this person? That's because they're not playing the same game as you, because you haven't clicked that this system encourages a different style of play. And yeah, some people then handle that well and then understand and adapt, and others maybe don't, and they just go, they struggle with it. And even if they do very well in singles, they struggle to adapt. Their head goes down, and then they want to start adjusting their matrix. And then you're like, oh, well, now the matrix, is it true or not? You can't, trying to adjust it mid event. You can adjust for mission for sure, but trying to adjust because now your head's gone, then that starts throwing whole spanners in the works, and then your matrix isn't reliable, which then means your pairings is going to start faltering as well. So you just end in this, you get into this spiral, which is never going to be good for you as a team. And having one player out of kilter with your whole team, even if you've got 7 other players who are doing well, that one player can cost you a round. And then you go from maybe winning the event to coming 5th, 6th, and it's still a decent result, but it's not the result you were hoping for.
Yeah, that almost to a T is what happened to America this year, or at least that's what it felt like, right? There was a lot of like singles player struggles for our team this year. And it was my first year across too. And it's funny, I felt like I mitigated some of the like, they're not playing the same game as me because I stayed the day before and watched the singles. And you would see it there because it was 20-0 system for the singles as well. And you would see the like recognition that someone was going to lose, and then just all the pieces come back into the corner, and you're like, what? And then they just score like 8, and the person that was like comfortably en route to a smashing win it was close. But yeah, there was like almost to a T what you described as a lot of the experiences that we had on the American team throughout the year or throughout the event.
Yeah, I mean, particularly if you, and I think this is, say, one of the strengths of the Polish singles system is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Typhus, but a lot of your events play a 20-0 system in
all of them.
All of them, yeah. So
had single win draw lose since 9th.
Yeah, exactly. So your whole tournament scene is built around that 20-0 WTC system, and I know a lot of your events use WTC terrain, whereas
All of them.
yeah, exactly. So you, in a lot of ways, that's a huge advantage for you because a lot of players are used to, if you're going to ITC events and you're doing like LVO or you're doing some of the big GW events, the terrain is massively different. The scoring systems, win, loss, draw. You need to win by a point, and it doesn't matter. It's a completely different mindset and a completely different list building exercise. And getting players to understand that swap can be very hard. So yes, if you have a lot of, I mean, I understand what you mean about the US team. You had a lot of new players which were very good singles players that win lots of big events in the US, do very well. They probably still were struggling a little bit to think, did they go into the mindset still as a singles player and not fully comprehend that, oh, actually, the people will play, as you say, it's a different game. You're playing a completely different mindset on completely different tables for with a scoring system that feels a little bit alien to you. Then you're already at a big disadvantage to the player that's fully immersed in that system, plays it all the time, knows that, okay, yes, I can actually score that point, or this is what my result's going to be because this is how I'm going to play the game, and I'm ignoring what my opponent's doing. It just changes the whole mindset. And for sure, yeah, I think every year we have new players. It's the same experience for them, even if they think they've got it, and then they get there, and then they're like, "Oh, okay, now I get it." At the end of the event, and you're like, "Okay, yeah, that's the way it is."
I love that you touched up on this. I think in none of the previous actual podcasts that we've done, it was actually a topic of conversation that we've had. And I would like to combine like two questions now, because you said you were captain, but I also know like you do not deal with all the responsibilities yourself alone. And I have like a combined question, like how do you actually guys choose the team? And in context of that, how do you feel the fact that most of the UK scene is singles in win draw lose system, and you do not really have team events? Like you have the Home Nations, which changed the name now, or it's Home Nation. Previously, it was Six Nations, and you
Yeah, I think
have
it's
like
8 nations now because they invite 2 more now. So we tried to grow
yeah,
it a little bit, but yeah,
yeah.
it was Home Nations, and then they've slowly started to expand. We added Belgium first, and then now they invite 2 more teams each year to participate, and it lets. Again, as you said, it's hard to get. There's not many 8-man teams events in the UK. There's a lot of 4, 5. They're starting to grow. Like Zach's running a few now, but again, Zach doesn't use a 20-0 system. I've tried to convince him to use a 20-0 system, and he says it won't sell well enough because the average player wants to play the GW way, if you want to call it that way, which I understand. He's running a business. He's trying to maximize ticket sales and maximize the number of people at his events. But yes, trying to get more events to run that 20-0 system with the terrain in England is very hard. And it's a battle that we always have. We run some of our own events as a team to try and use that system. And then I know that the one lucky thing we have is Matt, who is a big part of the Northern Warlords like team in the UK. They as a group have, I think, 30 or 40 WTC tables worth of terrain. So any events he runs, like we're actually at a team event this weekend. He's running an 8-man team event this weekend that is using WTC terrain. So we do get some chance at it, but nowhere near that, say, the Polish do with all your events.
We have nearly no 8v8s, by the way.
Yes, yeah. Well, they're hard to get. I mean, I'm impressed Robbo's managed to get 10 8-man teams. So it's 80 guys coming
That's
to do
a good tournament,
which is unusual.
That's
I mean, that's really good. So, I mean, we're taking 2 English teams. We've split we split our applicants between 2 teams, and then it helps us do some of the selection work. But yeah, there's still 8 other teams that are going, which is great.
Okay, yeah. And how do you guys handle like the team choosing? Like, do you have a system in place? Like Germany had a system of choosing the people according to the rankings, which was kind of similar in Scotland as well.
Yeah, so we've done a few over the years. We've tried different methods. Like we've tried We've tried a ranking system, but the problem with the ranking system is because our events are not really representative of where the WTC is with that scoring system and everything else. The ranking system left holes in our selection. One of the other issues you often have with the current meta in singles is at any one time, there's often one army that dominates, which can then mean that 2 or 3 of your people who in the rankings are all playing the same army. And then if they all get on the team, and if some of them aren't flexible, you end up with a problem that I've ended up with 3 Eldar players or 3 Tau players or 3.
Yeah, back in Nari days, right?
Yes, yeah.
Always
Yeah.
Eldar.
Oh, Unari days, you'd end up with 7 Unari players, and you were like,
Yeah.
I need 6 of you to swap. What are you going to do?
That's when we changed our system. We realized it won't work.
Yeah, well, we had a similar. We tried rankings a few times, and we just kept hitting that issue where it was, if you just get too many players all wanting to play the same list, and then if they're not flexible enough, some players are flexible and they swap around, others aren't. It just ends up you go, okay, well, now you've got a difficult decision to make when you've had, say, a player who plays another army really well that you want on the team. They've not made it because of the rankings, but that's what they've been playing all year. And you're like, well, if I'm going to take GSC, for example, or whatever the list is, that's the player to take, but I couldn't pick him because of the rankings. So we've tried rankings. We've also tried a system where like the captain gets voted in. We have a vote each year for the captain, and then the captain picks 2. Those 3 then picked 2 more, so you end up with 5, and then those 5 pick the last 3. We've done it that way a few times. That worked reasonably well. The only thing is you started to get favoritism and people trying to vote in friends and things like that. It started to get a little bit messy. So this year we just have a selection panel, and there's 4 of us, and we will pick the team. None of us are guaranteed places, so we all have to earn our places too. But so there's 4 on the selection committee, and then we'll just pick the 8 based on. We do review singles as the results because it is important to see people playing in the and staying current with the game. But then also we look at the team events. So we've got this one this weekend, and we had the Battle for Britain a few weeks ago, which was 5-man teams, but we took 3 English teams to that. So we split again experienced and new players among those 3 teams, and we use that to sort of gauge players as well. And then it'll be looking at what people play, some of the practice events we have where we come together and play games internally, and then use that to guide our selection. But yeah, we've played with a few different systems. I don't think there is a perfect system. It's very hard to find one. I think you maybe could make a ranking system work in somewhere like, maybe it could work in somewhere like Poland where all your events play WTC style with terrain and.
But you still have the best armies.
Yes, exactly.
So like
you always will have that problem. But in the UK, it's very hard to do it on rankings because the singles system is so different to WTC system.
Yeah. Then, as you said, like you were doing trainings, like team meetings, etc. What I'm actually wondering right now, do you guys use TTS at all, or did you use like? I know we've played just after the COVID struck. I remember playing those games, but I'm wondering like how much you have used it for these years, and how do you plan to use it for the next years?
Yeah, so I think for us, we found COVID changed everything. With the TTS became the tool to use because you couldn't go and play games. I mean, I think generally we don't feel that TTS can ever replace a real game. It's just not quite the same. So some of the guys that are involved in the team love it. They play, some of them play loads of games on TTS, and they do a lot of practice on it. Others don't play as much through TTS. They wouldn't play, say, a pickup game on TTS, but they will do we feel if you're playing a practice game on TTS within the group, it works quite well because you can not, I wouldn't say fudge it, but you can play with an intention because you're both trying to practice.
Yeah.
You're not playing you're like, okay, this is the intention here. This is how we're doing it. You can talk through things. So from that angle, it's very useful. But from now that games have opened up again, we don't really use it in a competitive setting. What we try then do is, where we're based in the UK, I mean, we're lucky compared to, say, the US, where you guys are so spread out potentially. We're not that spread out. I mean, we are spread out, but everybody is within probably, say, we've got some people up north, some people down south, and then there's quite a few in the sort of Midlands area. But if everybody wants to meet in the Midlands, nobody's driving more than 3 hours. So we can do full, okay, I want all the players there for a weekend. We'll use a venue, normally somewhere in the Midlands, and then that works. So we can do live practice weekends, which are important. And then also within the groups, just because of geographically, say in the Midlands here, there's about 4 or 5 regular applicants that are all based probably within an hour of each other living. You've got then Manchester and Liverpool area, where there's another 4 or 5 players again that are all WTC veterans that are all based around there. So they play each other regularly. We play each other regularly in the Midlands. And then in London now, you've probably got 3 or 4 that are, we would say, more regular. So there's 3 pockets, if you will, but then we are lucky in that because of the size of the country, we can say, okay, as long as I give enough notice, I say, I want to do a practice weekend where everybody needs to turn up at this date, this venue, people can make it work, which I know for other countries like the US or Germany, Poland's still much bigger than we are. That can be much more challenging because of the travel and distance.
Although I would like to add one thing also for the listeners from like other teams. I think TTS, it's not only about playtesting between 2 players. I think like the biggest value is when you have like, say, me and Duda would play over on TTS, and then we would have like our 8 new prospects watching that game.
Yes,
I think that's really the biggest value of TTS. Not the game I will get against Duda, but what the others might learn.
Yes, I agree with that. And we actually do that sometimes in a live setting as well. So like if we have a practice weekend, if there's a key game that particularly say when you're looking at a matrix and I'm sure you guys have had this before, when player A says, oh, I win this game, and player B says they win this game as well. Sometimes we go, well, one of you's wrong, and they might have different logical reasons why, but sometimes those are the sort of games where you can go, okay, let's play that game, and then a number of people will also watch it, and then we can bounce ideas. Okay, why do you think it's this sort of result? What's your plan here? What was your logic going into that? Oh, because I'm going to do this and this, and then the opposing players will, yes, I thought you were going to do that, and this is what I'm going to do, and then normally one player's missed something, but sometimes having that more open forum of watching games and seeing people play helps open people's mind. Okay, this is a different style of game as we've talked about before. So that I think that's TTS is a good way of using it as well. But if you can do it in live, it's also very, very beneficial.
It's also useful for the case of like new armies coming out. So you probably do not have time to analyze every new army, but you have 1-2 players who will look into it, and then you can watch their games and actually get like intel how the specific army works. So I would say, but it's another part of the previous topic, right? But it's still a good tool, but I would say it's a tool that will help people grow. It's not the choice that you should be doing for your whole team.
Yeah, I think if you have the option.
I think. Sorry, I was going to say it's as you say, it's a great tool. Just never let it replace. If you have the choice between going to play a real game and playing on TTS, the real game should always win. But if you have the option to play TTS and it supplements you, that's great.
You were saying something, Anthony.
Oh, I was just saying that you would never if you could theoretically have the entire team show up to a practice weekend together, you'd never be like, no, don't do that. We'll just TTS instead. If you have the option to have everybody link up, obviously that has a lot of knock-on effects for just team unity alone, let alone all the other game-based benefits.
Yeah, exactly. And that team unity is a big thing because, we might touch on it later, but that's part of when you're selecting a team. That's one of the other issues you can potentially have with if it's a rigid ranking system selection. You can have players that by a ranking system make it onto the team that have issues with other players on the team. Then it causes disharmony. Does it then mean that players won't practice against each other because they don't like each other? You have a dynamic. Of course, you hope that players are. I mean, I don't want to use the word professional because we are not professional sports teams, but the way we view it is we are going to compete, and you do want a professional mindset, but there is always egos. There's always things to manage, and sometimes when you're looking at selection, you have to take that into consideration as well, because if you don't, you can have a team implode not from gaming reasons, but for other reasons that actually, if you'd recognize those issues during selection, you could have actually avoided them.
So that was actually my next question about handling egos in your team, because let's be honest, like you guys were like second most amount of celebrities in your team. Like you could say celebrities. Like I think like people from US were the most known, obviously, to not maybe guys in WTC community, but like to the broader audience of 40K. And like you guys obviously had names like Robo or Money that kind of everybody knew.
Yes,
and then like the remaining teams had no one who had that kind of visibility. So how do you guys actually handle like that ego? Do you encounter problems with it?
So potentially, I mean, a good example is say Robbo. I've never had any issues with Robbo. Like Robbo he's involved with Art of War and he does a lot of stuff for them now. But from a team point of view, like every year he's pretty, because he plays so many games. He's like, what do you want me to play? And he'll just go away and play that. He has things that I'd like to play this or I'd like to play that. But from an ego point of view, he's super easy to manage. So that helps. Because he could be more of an ego if he wanted to be, but he doesn't. He's not necessarily on that ITC rankings push in the same way that other players are necessarily. So he's not. He will take different lists to different events to play things, to try things. Like I think since coming back from the WTC where he played NIDS for us this year, and he played a lot of games with NIDS, he played many games. I don't think he's taken the same army to an event since he's come back, because he's just like, we're not in selection process yet. We're not fine tuning lists. So he's taken all sorts from like Knights. He hasn't touched NID since, but I think he's using Voltan this weekend.
He used Harlequins, right?
Yeah, he's using Harlequins on another event. He used I think Demons at one event. He's played all sorts and he's pretty flexible in that respect. On the other side, and I understand why, but say Manny is more of an ego, but that's because of his business is to be seen on the scene. He's trying to win the ITC. So he wants to play the top list at any point in the year. And we have had that before, where Manny goes 3 weeks before the event, I want to play this list because it's more powerful than the list he was playing, and we have to manage that. The flip side is, of course, you've got a player who plays loads of games, is very good at the game, and is right on the meta, if you will, in that because he plays so much and goes all over the place, he sees that different side of the game that some other players might not see. But yes, you do have to then manage that ego within the team. So he's probably the most ego to manage. The one that people assume would be another ego would be Alex Harrison. Ironically, for the team events, he actually doesn't have that ego with playing. Like he swapped onto Knights last minute for us because that worked best for the team, and then he went away and learned the army and then did very well at the WTC. But he's never actually, from the outside in, I think people assume he's going to be a huge issue for us, but from a army point of view and things like that, for teams, he'll play whatever I ask him to generally. So he's pretty good.
Yeah, when I played him at WTC, he seemed very like soldier. He was like, I will do what I need to in this matchup because this is my job. Like he was a man with a task.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but I think people assume that because on singles he's a bit more leery. He's a bit more sort of he has he does have an ego and he has an attitude. But in teams he's very different.
It's a thing that I call that he doesn't only play on the table, but he also plays around the table. Like there's that mental game that you can play on your opponent, giving him a little bit of pressure.
He's different at WTC than he is because I think he understands that in singles he can play around a bit more. He can do what he wants because it's his own result. Whereas I think he really gets that at teams, if he messes up, he screws the whole team over, and he doesn't. I don't think he's never wanted to be in that position. So I think he's a different person when he plays in teams than he is in singles. But from an outside in, the person I get asked the most about is he a nightmare to manage? It's normally Alex actually, and it's not, which is interesting. But
that is interesting.
I guess that's just a perception thing from outside and inside.
Like he has the worst rep. Like you would understand that he would be.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, from within our group of players, he has because of his rep. It's an interesting with Alex, for example, is from a selection point of view, because he's a great player. If he didn't have the rep issues he had, he'd probably be an auto pick. He'd be looking at being on the selection committee. He could be we delegate like vice captain roles and things like that within the group. He'd be doing all of that, but because of his reputation, he can't really do that, and he has to justify his place each year because of his other game stuff. But that's his choice. That's how we have talked to him about it, and he is trying to take that on board. But it is one of those that we do say to all of our players, your actions in a singles event, not just on the table but around the table, is being watched as well as your gaming results, and that is part of your selection. And we have to make that clear because we do live now in a day and age where, rightly or wrongly, games get streamed. Somebody makes a mistake. People
not just a water bottle.
Well, water bottle, yeah, but even any stream, somebody makes an issue, and sometimes they can just explode. And was it a real issue or not? Was it people just? I mean, when you're playing some of these events now, which are 8-9 games, did people just make an honest mistake? It doesn't never looks that way on the internet. So we do say to players, if you want to apply to play on the WTC, you do have to be mindful of what you do around the table is also just as important as what you do on the table.
Yeah, especially for you guys where your singles events are so universally attended by members of the team, you're going to see it.
Yes, exactly, yeah. Like, I mean, there's always players, I mean, because of the way that the Zach runs his events, they're all the big events in the UK, there's always multiple players on the team that are there. So even if I'm not at one of the events, if something happens, I always, somebody will come straight back to me and say, oh, this happened at this event. And then I normally have to, okay, what's happened? What do I have to go and speak to Zach? Do I have to go and speak to Typhus, for example, because I know you ref a lot of them? What was the issue? And that it just does go round. So we do say to all of our players, you have to be mindful of that. That is something that will be watched and looked at, because and I know, for example, Manny had some of that, if you will, because he is on our team. You could call him the biggest celebrity on our team. He has a bit of a target on his back because he does lots of events. He goes all over the place. People will challenge things he does or things like that. And he struggled with that a little bit people would say things online and then he'd try and respond and deal with it. And you're like, you're digging yourself a hole. Just leave it and deal with it privately, internally, if you want to, directly to that player. But don't blow the internet up because you're just feeding the beast that is online.
Don't feed the trolls.
Yeah, you feed the trolls, and that you go down to their level, and they're always going to beat you at their level. So you're better to deal with it in a different way, and that's something he had to learn last year with a few people saying certain things, and then he got upset about it because he's like, well, that's not what happened, and then it just escalated on a chat, and you're like, dude, that's what happens when you engage in these chats. It's always going to happen. Deal with it separately. But yeah, it is something that we have to watch. And as I think it's maybe more of an issue probably I suspect the biggest team that has it would be the US, because you have all the Art of War guys. They do have a big online presence. So they are being watched all the time. People are watching their games, seeing how they get on. Whereas I guess it's less of an issue for you, Typhus, with your team. You don't have the same internet celebrities on your team, if you will.
Not yet.
Like, I would be D1 and maybe Pumbaa.
Yes, exactly.
And we are kind of unknown, so.
I don't know. Skark's name showed up in a bunch of memes after this year's.
Oh, yeah. Actually, that's a thing that I'm kind of grateful that what you mentioned at the very beginning of the whole podcast, Josh, is that like the whole ETC is not only WTC. Sorry, I still mix those two up.
Oh, I do the same. Don't worry about it. The amount of times you go, it's ETC, and then people are like, "What are you talking about?" No, sorry, WTC.
It's fine. Just tweet us. It's okay.
So yeah, I think like the biggest advantage of the whole event, obviously, there is like immense amount of pressure when you know that you've been preparing for a long time and you want to perform, but like seeing all the faces, and like as soon as you're done with your game, you're just amongst a bunch of your best friends that you see from year to year, which is a thing that I would say like WTC is worth going just for that one feeling of camaraderie and like the whole community that's there. Like I love coming back every year just to see the people and go for a beer and talk about life and pushing plastic soldiers around.
Yeah, and I think, I'll add to that. I think it's for the WTC, and of course it's the ETC before that, but over the years, that's only got better and better. I think if I look at some of the early ETCs I went to, you didn't have that in the same way. That
Germany was fun, huh?
Oh yeah, the Germans. There was at one point they were a nightmare to play.
Really?
Yes, yeah. It's a completely different team now to the team that's there. I don't think I'm not sure if any of them.
To give you an example, the first year that we beat Germany, I think I was 17 back then, so I was just basically this tall. I remember that when we won and we shouted from happiness as the team, like the remaining players applauded us. They were literally clapping their hands because they were happy that Germans lost.
Rough.
Like they were the bad guys, and that's the thing that Fred and Liam wanted to change, and I think their team is changed 180 degrees. Like they are great people now.
Which I love
wasn't the case way back.
Yeah.
Way back.
We're talking years ago. We're not talking recently.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah,
we're talking like 10 years ago.
Yeah. I was just saying it's interesting to see a community's perception change over the course of time, right?
There's been like a huge push towards a more gentleman kind of play, that you leave the table and you then become friends and do podcasts together, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think also it's also come from with, say, Neil being head ref, and he just doesn't take any of that.
Not at all.
He's changed the mindset as well. Like the
it's
refs,
mainly because of Neil.
Yes, yeah. The refs in the past wouldn't make the big calls that he would have made, and people used to push. You got some of the ETCs. You're like, people are going to push the rules as far as they can push them, and the refs would sort of let it happen because they didn't have that fair play mantra that Neil has. Whereas Neil would now go, if you want to play it that way, you can play it that way, but I'm going to yellow card you, because that's clearly not the intention of the. Whereas before you used to have things like, one of the best example I remember, and I can't remember. It was definitely the Germans against somebody else. There was two armies that were both plane heavy lists, and at that point you hit planes on sixes unless you were also a flyer. But as a flyer, you could choose: did you hit ground targets on your ballistic skill or air targets? But whichever target you didn't choose, you hit the other type on sixes. So if I chose, my planes are going to hit other planes on 3+, because that's my ballistic skill, ground targets are now hit on 6+, but you had to declare at the beginning of your turn which way you're going to do it. And I remember this one game where literally both armies were just flyers with no ground targets. One player didn't declare that he was firing at other flyers, so his opponent forced him to hit on 6s. The refs then allowed it because he didn't declare it. And then the same opponent then forgot the following turn. So his opponent pulled the same card on him, and it just all kicked off. And it was just like, this is the game we're playing. Whereas Neil wouldn't have had any of that nowadays. So I think both the player mindset has changed in that the WTC is there. We all take it very seriously. We go to be competitive. We want to win. But I think winning in the right way has become a much bigger part of the WTC now, whereas some of the early ETCs, there was certainly teams that it was a win at all costs attitude. How any advantage they could get, they would take, which just makes for a much tenser event. It's
much harder.
Not enjoyable.
Now, I can't remember for the last few years. I can't remember a bad game I've had against any team that I've played.
I mean, even in the last year, right? The team that won the event also won best sports. Like that's a huge accomplishment of the event structure, let alone of the team themselves.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And I know that we came second, and we had 3 votes or 2 votes for that as well.
Yeah,
exactly. So I think the whole mentality's changed. Does it mean that teams are taking it any less seriously? No. I mean, the amount of prep that the Polish do, the amount of preps that I'm sure, I know it's a newer setup, but I'm sure the Germans were doing a lot of prep. The same with, Australia, they're in their own bubble a little bit, but the amount of work they were doing, speaking to some of their players, we all put a lot of effort in. It's the highlight of our year from it's the event to win for anybody who's a WTC veteran. If you ask them if you could only win one event this year, of any event you're going to, even if they're doing LVO or they're doing big events, singles events, LGT, or you could win the WTC, I think every WTC vet would pick, I want to win the WTC.
I've only been to WTC once, but I would literally not go to any other events if you could guarantee me that it would win me the WTC. Exactly. It is that much more important to me now than everything else.
Yeah, so it's not that we take it any less competitively and seriously, but I think the way that it's evolved over time is now just that we're all a group of players that most of us have known each other for a long time. We're good friends. We play the game in the intention that we want to play it in, and then win,
the
lose.
Better one will win.
Yes, and then win, lose, we're still friends at the end of it. Whereas before, that was not always the case.
Yeah, but we are kind of getting back to the history, and I kind of expected that, talking to someone who's been longer in the ETC, WTC scene than I was. But I've got a few more questions about the previous year, which I'm kind of interested as a captain myself. How did you guys approach choosing your armies? I know you can anticipate the meta and find counters, or did you guys consider table choices when you were choosing the armies? Were you looking at what armies can work well on those tables, or were you doing for example, mock pairings before the lists even were submitted to find out whether a specific army wouldn't work because it would have no place within the team?
Yeah, so the answer is yes to all three. Of course, the spanner in the works for last year, and I think it ends up because of the date that the WTC picks. And I know we've recently had a vote about moving it earlier. Part of the problem with the date that the WTC picks is GW always tends to do a big release not that long before it, and then almost every year we say we're not going to change, and then too many captains, and I don't mean to disrespect some of the captains, but it generally tends to be all the captains that are less worried about their placing, if that makes sense. If they're going to the WTC as I want to enjoy the event, they don't think they're going to be competitive in the top 3, or understandably they go, well, why would I want to play an old version of the game? I just want to play the newest version because that's what we all play. We want to play the new game. Why would I want to play the last edition or the last a version of the game that nobody else is playing locally next to me? So that was I mean, we've had it before where it's been full edition changes, but even this year, while it wasn't an edition change, the Nephilim book was still, from an army perspective, a huge change. So that's certainly through us. We pretty much planned. We had our 8 armies pretty sorted, and then we had to not completely go back to the drawing board, but there was definitely like, okay, we have to reassess now a number of lists because either their secondaries got tanked, other armies' secondaries got much better, the CP changes. So that really caused issues. But I think to answer your original question, yes, what we try and do is we try and go, okay, what do we think the meta is going to be? And we would send, this is what we think maybe the 8 will look like, but it's hard to, if the game is in a good state, there should be more than 8 armies that can make that list. So you actually end up with maybe a list of 12 armies or 14 armies, whatever combination we think these are going to be common builds within the team. And you might potentially have different builds within the same army. So for example, when we were looking at what might be popular, we said, okay, there's going to be, say, Leviathan Nids, but there will be some teams that take Kraken Nids, which is a very different style of play. So we would list both of those options. Then again, within other armies, you might have, okay, within Eldar and Harlequins, we weren't allowed to take both, but certainly some teams are going to take Eldar. Certainly some teams would take Harlequins. Some might take mixed. We try and list a few different options within those, some of the key armies. And then we try and do a matrix versus those options, and then try and see where our gaps were. So if you're clearly, okay, within a general pairings matrix, there is problems against a particular army, okay, we need to look at how do we counter that. That's going to cause us issues. So for example, okay, I think we spoke about it earlier, Typhus. For me, if you're trying to try and counter an army, unless you have 2 solutions to that army, you don't have a counter, because of the way the pairing system works is having one counter, unless you get really lucky, and that's what happens to be in the hole at the end of the round, where there is no choice of who plays who, or for some reason your opposing team, you've put forward a counter to an army and they decide to give you that as a slot, but you can't. That's not an expected result. If you're trying to counter an army, unless you have 2, you don't have a counter. So we were trying to then look at. We would then look at that and say, okay, where's the armies that have gaps? And then that would help you maybe narrow down, if you've got a list of 12, 14 different options. Well, if we start cutting out some of these options, how do we get to 8 that gives us the best looking overall matrix? Cutting out that army, we don't lose. We've actually got 2 or 3 other armies that cover a similar role to that army, but we don't need all 3 of them. Oh, actually, but if we take out this army, we've now got a big hole in the pairing matrix because we don't have a solution to this type of army, for example. So we try to do that. Then we also try to look at the tables as well, because I think, as you say, that's particularly in trying to get new players to understand that if they've been playing on LGT terrain, it is nothing like WTC terrain.
Night and day, in fact. So different.
Yeah, completely different. So your gun line that you think works really well on LGT terrain and can beat lots of players suddenly hits a board where you think you're going to prey on something and you can't see a single thing turn 1. It changes the matchup completely. Also changes what's viable within the game. So getting players to open their minds to that. So we do try and get them to Robbo's, as I said, he's got a number of WTC sets. A number of our players who are veterans bought WTC terrain packs, so they could do the 8 boards. And then to our practice weekends, we take those boards and we set up the different boards to really get players to. It's one thing seeing a board on a map, and then it's another thing actually seeing it on the table, playing with it with models. So we try to do that as well, and then we try to do some mock pairings as well within our group. Always that's a little bit hard to do mock pairings within your group because you know how each other thinks. So you sort of end up second guessing, triple guessing each other in pairings. But we also then did have, because we have the 6 nation, 8 nation event, for example, running up to the event, the Irish asked if we'd share lists with them and then do some mock pairings with them on the proviso that they wouldn't share the lists further out than within their team. We wouldn't share their lists. So we do try and do some work there. And that's a trust thing as well, because of course, the Irish could have very happily given all of our lists to the Polish or the Germans.
They didn't.
No, exactly.
If you're wondering, they didn't.
No, I didn't think so. But you never know for sure. So that is a leap of faith or a trust. But the risk of your list getting out weighed up against doing some actual pairings against, again, a team that you don't know intimately, so you don't know their pairing mindset, helps you practice ideas and go, okay, how are they going to pair? Oh, okay, I didn't see that.
You get exposure to like different approaches, which is why we advocate for playing a lot of those 8v8 TTS scrims.
Yes, yeah, because
to see how different you can perceive the whole pairing process.
Yes, because it is. I mean, the amount I've done the event so many times now, and still every time you go through a pairings and you go, I'm going to put this down, and they almost certainly are going to give me this option, and we're going to take that. I would take that option because it makes the rest of the pairings matrices better. And then you flip over their 2 cards and you go, they've given me neither of the options I think they should have given me. And then you have to reassess your pairings. Often, if you've done your job right, you can capitalize on that and go, well, actually, this opens up a new avenue for pairings that works out better. But it's still, when you do your matrix enough, and then you go, this is what I think should happen, and still I'm surprised the amount of times it's not what happens, and you then have to adjust as you go through.
That's what I was saying a lot lately. I don't think there's any magic to doing pairings. Pairings completely rely on your estimations and matrices, and every team, I would say, has 1 or 2 guys who will do the pairings on the same level. It all just boils down who has the better estimations.
Yes, yeah, I think that is, and that's something I stress to to new players so much, is if your matrix is wrong, you mess up the whole round. If you have colors in your system, and each country might do their system a little bit differently, but whatever your system is, if you get your predictions wrong on your matrix, I can't be second guessing every color you've put in your matrix. I have to trust you that what you've put in your matrix is correct. And then if I when we're looking at the pairings, you've put a yellow or green matchup. So for us, that's a positive matchup in our system. You've put that, and then you come back with a negative result. Dice can happen, of course, and things can happen. But if you've mispaired that, and I then engineered to get that matchup because that's how the matrix works best, then we've possibly lost the round because of that from one mistake. Because as you say, now there's enough people who've been doing pairings long enough that I'd say most teams have somebody that's good at it, or maybe multiple players that are good at it. They might have different viewpoints for sure, but
it's not rocket science.
Yeah, it's not rocket science, but your output is only as good as the data you put in, and if people's matrices are wrong, then you're guessing blind. Really, it's not going to work. The only caveat I would say to that is where teams can be clever is if they have a list idea that is underestimated, and then their matrix will throw people off. So I think
which was the case with Russians for a long time.
Yeah, the Russians, and I'd say the Australians are a good example of that because they play in their own meta bubble. Some of their lists, I'm sure many teams, for example, underestimated their GSC list. They thought this is not not a lot of the teams didn't take GSC, and I bet they went, oh, that's not very good. I'm good into that matchup. That's a yellow. That's a positive matchup, and then they've maybe not given it enough thought and play into it.
I had to explain that list to our team.
Yes, yeah. Well, as soon as I saw it, I was like, "Where's our GSC players?" I was like, "There is a reason they are taking this. What have we missed? Because we didn't take GSC, so that we've either missed something, or there's a reason we didn't take it. But there is definitely a reason they've taken it. What's the purpose of this list? Because if we underestimate it in pairings, that will cause major issues. I think probably another good example was, I know John Lennon's list for the Americans. I think a lot of people underestimated that as well. I think they looked at that and went, oh, custodes are crap. They've been nerfed twice. They've lost a lot of their benefits. He's taken a weird list. He's got some dreadnoughts. Who cares? And I don't think, I mean, I remember I had 2 players on my team say that, and I went, go and play it, and then tell me it's as bad as you think it is. And then they went to play it, went, oh, it's actually much better than I thought it was. I was like, yes,
Yep.
you at the WTC, my general rule is I tell any player, if you think a list is terrible, particularly if it's on one of what are considered top teams, you've probably missed something, not them. So go away and have another look at it before you make that snap judgment and say, oh, this list isn't good. Because
team events also allow you to take those weird lists. It's also
Yes.
worth mentioning.
Yeah, would you take something like that to a singles? Probably not. Maybe if you were just trying to test it and play it just to get some reps in, but to seriously win a singles, would you take some of the lists you see at WTC? Certainly not. But if you are one of the teams that manages to develop a list that other teams don't realize what it does, in pairings, it gives you such an advantage. I mean, I remember the best example of that was a few years ago when Leaf Blower Guard was a big thing, all the Hydras, all the Chimeras, and then I can't remember if it was
our Tyrannids.
Was it your Tyrannids? I think it was with all the GSC. Sorry, all the
Steelers and
Gene
Tervigon.
Steelers, yeah. The
to
Polish.
To give a story from my side, the guy who was playing that list, we was told by Vladi, I think, like 6 months before the event, you need to beat that army. And he literally played Skark twice a week and got from 0 points on average to not getting less than 17. And he built like a wacky list that nobody knew what was happening.
Yeah, exactly. And because it was a perfect combo with everybody was going Leaf Blower Guard as a put forward. At this point, sorry, just to give you an idea, we
it's
didn't
just
have
old guys rambling around.
Well, you didn't have you didn't get to pick from 2 armies with your pairings. It was literally you put an army forward and they attacked with one. So like when the people were putting this Leaf Blower Guard forward, going, it doesn't really have any counters on a board it gets to pick, and the Polish were like, oh, we have a counter, and all the other teams didn't notice. I think only maybe later in the tournament,
after 3 teams got their Leaf Blower stabled, then they realized.
Exactly, yeah. But
if only someone could have done that with Harlequins this year and realized that maybe the Eldar into the Harlequins was not ideal.
Yeah, but that is the thing. You've got to, if you do catch a list, you can really affect your pairings and your matrix. But otherwise, as Typhus said, it's not rocket science. Every team nowadays has a good person that knows what they're doing with pairings. And I
would also add on to that. I think like the top 5 when it comes to the average skill level, I would probably say we had like in every team 4 really good players, 2 like way average players, way above average players, and 2 like a little bit above average players in every team. So there's no discrepancy in the skill level as well. It all comes down to preparation.
I agree with that. There's always
it's all about preparation at this point.
Yes. So if you can find a clever list, or you come up with something that's a little bit different, you have an advantage. But otherwise, it is or the other one that is when there's a rush because of the date of the WTC and if the GW does a big change, we end up swapping, and then it just becomes a rush of who misses the least amount of stuff. Or if you miss a big army because you didn't get the places in, then your whole event. I mean, I remember the year in Salamanca where it was it was a terrible event because we were playing the indexes straight out the box. But
120 flocks.
yeah, 120 flocks and things like that. But I remember because we had so little time, I know our team, for example, we missed the 8 Dark Talon list. We just didn't see it. Whereas a number of the other teams saw it and
Us and Russians had them.
Yes, yeah, there's quite a few teams that did that and did very well with it, but we just didn't see it as a team because the whole game reset. So at that point, then yeah, it is just who can find the best combos quickly. But when the meta's a bit more stable, then your matrixes are more stable. Your player skill, as I think as Typhus said, all the top teams have a pretty similar level of player skill. It's then who can engineer the matchup slightly better, gives you a slight advantage in the results, and then your players delivering is the key.
Okay, now coming back from the old guys rambling about the good old days, what was happening back when we were still kids, not guys who are losing hair. Like I have one question regarding this year. I know obviously Nephilim shook a lot up, but this year was the first year we had the pod system. So I'm actually curious how much you guys prepared for your own pod compared to the regular Swiss phase, or did you kind of neglect the pod because you knew like you would kind of go through it easily and focus on the top teams?
Yeah, so for us, we looked at the pod and we felt that Italy, because we had Italy in our pod, which could be a potential. You never quite know with Italy which team is going to turn up. Some years they seem to be really on it and they have a strong team. And
once we lost to them, I still remember.
Yeah, some
they have
teams,
a strange selection process, if I'm not mistaken. I had a friend.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how they do it, but they're a bit of a wild card team in that some years they've been very, very good, and then other years they seem to be middle of the pack, nowhere type. So we knew they were in our group. We didn't know which type of team would turn up. So, and I think also the mission we hit them in, it was round 3, so we knew people would be tired because playing 3 WTC games in a day is crazy. So
never fucking again.
Hopefully that was brutal.
So that one we did prep for because we're like, the matrix we're going to be tired. The matrix just has to be right. We don't want to mess it up. And the mission was slightly awkward as well. It was one of those missions that could go wrong. So we're like,
the drawish hammer. And
drawish. So we're like, this could be our banana skin, if you will. If we're going to draw or potentially lose a matchup in our pod, that's the one we just have to make sure we're okay in. The other 2, we felt we would win. Of course, we still did a matrix for them, and we still took them seriously. In that, I think if you don't take a team seriously, they can surprise you.
You need to do your due diligence.
Yes, exactly. And I know, not to hark back to the old days, I remember a great example of that was the year we won it in 2012 in Poland. Germany, we'd drawn to Germany. We'd won all the other. So both us and Germany were on 4 wins and a draw going into the last round. We played France, and the Germans had played the Russians. The Russians at that point weren't necessarily the team they were where they were winning. They hadn't won an event yet. But I remember speaking to some of the Germans. The Germans hadn't viewed the Russians at all before the event, hadn't even done a matrix for them before the round because they didn't view them as serious competition. So they had to do their matrix right before the round, and they ended up drawing with the Russians that round. We beat the French, so we ended on 5 wins and a draw. They ended on 4 and 2, and then we won the event. So I think you cannot ignore any team, and I took that as a lesson. I was like, never, even if they came last the year before, you still got to do due diligence, do your pairing matrix, check the mission, make sure you're comfortable. Do you have to spend hours and hours prepping for them? Not necessarily. You want to focus your time on the teams you think might be your serious competition, but ignore any team at your peril, I think, is the lesson I learned from that year. And I've tried to keep that going forward.
This brings me to my next question. Like, how much did you actually guys prepare those matrices into every team? it takes a lot of time. So like how did you guys approach it? Like you created Google Docs and forced people like you have to fill in all of those?
Yeah, so we do make our players do all the matrices. So we do a matrix for every team. But then what we do is with the way we picked it is effectively we put, because we know that players will get lazy, tired, etc. as they're going through a matrix. We made all the what we consider the top teams, all the first tabs. So you do those first. So do America, do Poland, do Germany, do Australia, do all those teams first when you're at your freshest and you're taking it more seriously. And then as the teams progress through, if somebody tried to sit and do it in one day, when they're reading team 23, are they going to really look at in depth at that NID list, or are they going to go, oh, is it Leviathan NIDs? I'm a yellow against that. Oh, is it this? And they're just going to do the autofill color. So we do realize that was a thing, but we get a matrix for every team, and then we spend a lot more time on the teams that we think we're gonna have to play and go through that matrix in more detail. Particularly with this year, I think the interesting one was because of the way the pods worked, is that you could then try and second guess, okay, which teams do we think are going to win their pods? Which teams do we think, okay, then that cuts it down to, we know who we're playing rounds 1 to 3. Round 4, well, we're most likely going to play one of these teams. So let's focus, make sure those matrices are all as solid as we can be. And then, of course, the teams that you think, okay, which teams are likely to win a lot of games, America, Poland, Germany, we need to make sure our matrices are right for those. Of course, the only thing then you have to do is, we do say to the first 3 matrices could be done more accurately because we knew the mission. For the next ones, you have to do a more generic matrix because you don't know the mission you're playing. And then when we knew the draw, we then did get our players to check if the mission changed their coloring system. Because that can, if you end up, certain missions are much more drawy than others, and you go, well, actually, in this mission, that person just camps he still gets 42 on primary because of the way the system's set up. So I'm only good. It goes down a color, etc. because I can't push for a big win. So we did get them to review the rounds when we started to know the exact mission as well.
The mission's huge, right? Like I had a round where into the Australians, where my Leviathan list into Liam Hackett's Necrons most of the time is like 8, 10, usually fine, not great, whatever. But I went second against him on Death and Zeal and got like fully move blocked into my deployment zone, and it was like, oh, this is like a 0 now, a 1 maybe. It was huge.
You might kill his whole army, but if you can't get out of your deployment zone, he scored all the points.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. He was at 88 points on turn 3 or something like that. It was wild. Like,
yeah.
Whereas in a different mission,
it'd be fine.
The game is completely different. So yes, that's the one step we have to have, is go, here's your matrix, and it is a more general matrix. But then we do make sure they check, okay, now we know the mission, who we're playing, please review your colors. Are they accurate for this mission, or do you need to adapt them? And we did make sure that players were doing that, because, as you say, it can be the mission you hit certain armies in can massively change what you think that score is going to be.
Okay, and then how did you guys decide what actual playtest you were needing? Like, you probably done some mock pairings when you already had the pairings against certain team with all the estimations. But how did you guys prepare? You've done probably some boot camps, but how did you choose the certain matchups you want to playtest?
Yeah, so for us, we tried to look for if there was any, because I said how important having good information in your matrix were. If there were any lists that people were having question marks over, they were our priority to be played. So, like we said, the American custode list, a few of my players said, "Oh, that's not a very good list." I was like, if there's a reason they're taking it, you can't just say that and write it off. We need to put it on table. The same with the Australian GSC. okay, what's the purpose of this list? We've not taken it, so we've either missed the purpose or we've not factored it into our matrix. How does that affect our team? So that would be they're normally the first pass. If I always try and get my players when they do the matrix, if you genuinely, I mean, you hope that there's none of these, but there always can be. If they're genuinely matchups you don't know the result of, I don't want you to put in a color that you're going to guess. I'd rather you put in a question mark in the matrix, and then I can review all those and go, if there's commonality in there's multiple question marks on this list, or there's multiple question marks in this scenario, then we can play that game. Or does it need a forum, if you will, to go, okay, this player is unsure in this matchup. Who's our expert on that list?
Yep.
What is
It's
your
funny that you guys had that method for dealing with that, because like your list specifically, the Blood Angel list with all the Death Company, was something that when the list went live, we had a player go like, oh, that list is like, why would he do that? And I was like, I'll put it on the table and try it. They did just get a secondary change, and I played it, and that's basically since changed the face of Blood Angels play in singles even, because that Death Company secondary is so good. The first time I played it, I was blown away by how fast that list racked up points, and was like disappointed we didn't take that.
Yeah, exactly, and that's the thing. Because we knew the Nephilim change, there would be stuff we missed. There'd be the stuff that other teams missed. So if there was that commonality of people like, oh, I don't think that's very good, or there's question marks on the team, then I'm like, okay, we need to look at those and try and work out as a group what have we missed, or why have they taken that? Because there was more than 8 armies you could take for your 8. So they've sacrificed something else to take that. There is a reason they have taken it. What are they trying to use it for? What's their intention? And if it's not clear on the matrix, then we need to look at that. So that would be that was our first pass of what to play. And then after that, it would then be looking at key matches. Okay, if once the lists were released, of course, before that we had an idea what we thought the meta would be, but until then, when you see the lists, you can actually then look at it and go, okay, are the Tau lists are all similar? Are they all trying to do a certain thing? Are we're happy with our counters? How many? I know, for example, one of the things that was a choice is like we took Knights and Chaos Knights. I think did the Americans, you took no Knights at all? Was that right?
Yeah, we built to fight them entirely.
Yes, exactly. So you'd gone the opposite way. Either some teams. So it was then looking at, okay, have people done different things within their pairings with their army combos? Did we miss a hole within the team? And how do we engineer those? And then I think after those two, then it would generally be, of course, players tend to look at, okay, the Americans or the Polish or the Germans, what are they doing? Why have they? Is there something in there that, oh, that's a little bit different? That should be a good matchup for me, generally as an army, but they've built it a little bit differently. I want to play that more. So, say a good example was the German NID list was a very different NID list from, even though it was Leviathan, he didn't have the Reaper Tyrant. He didn't have I don't think he had any warriors, did he? He didn't go to the warrior block.
I played against him. It was a very interesting experience.
Yeah. But he went a completely different route. And then you're like, okay, we need to understand what that's being used for and done, because if we don't, they'll catch us out.
If your list didn't have like army-wide essentially access to Phenopanes throughout the game, you would just melt against that list. It's so many mortal wounds.
Yes, yeah. Oh, I mean, my brother plays NIDS a lot, and he put it on the table. He wasn't playing this year, but he put it on the table for us to practice against.
Right.
And yeah, like I think one turn he did 50 mortal wounds to some guy's arm, to one of the armies, and like, oh,
yep.
It does that many mortal wounds? You're like, yes, it can do, with all the spore mines and everything else. And so you have to. That's the thing. Instantly, as soon as the lists are out, you're trying to find where have people been clever, and make sure you understand what it does.
And following up on that, did you actually guys, you had few coaches, so did you use that to actually scout how those armies played as well?
Yes, yeah. So the and it's interesting. The WTC
I
is
mean,
always
throughout the event, obviously.
yes, yeah. I mean, the WTC is always a bit weird about they keep changing their mind about what coaches are allowed to do and not allowed to do. Like in some years, they've allowed coaches to literally sit at a pairing table and record the whole pairings for different teams. And
Yeah,
then they
I had my coaches ordered which pairings, which round of the pot phase they should
yes.
record.
And then in some years, they decided to ban that because they felt it was too big an advantage to teams that did have multiple coaches, and teams that didn't have coaches couldn't do that. So we always have to check each year what our coaches are allowed to do. But yes, I don't think they've ever stopped coaches going and watching other games in other teams. I don't think they've ever banned that. So yes, we do. We have done that before when we've gone, okay, I want you to go this list, go and watch what it's doing, and see how they're playing it, and just confirm that's what we thought they were trying to do with it. And if they're not, come back to us and explain what they're doing. And then we try with our coaches. They all had different army experience, if that made sense, in that they weren't necessarily specialists in one army. They had a broad range, but they did they had a few armies that they specialized in. So I could say to Nathan, please go and watch this NID game. I want to understand what they were doing differently. Did we understand correctly what they tried to achieve with that list? Tom, for example, was more into he was Eldar, Dark Eldar, things like Orcs. He played that sort of stuff. He could go and watch those sorts of games. Adam plays different lists as well. So we had different options for people to go and watch different games and just confirm our suspicions. You can't do it 100% because you're only watching one game, but it does give you useful intel when they come back and go, oh no, he's actually playing it massively more aggressively than we did in our play testing, and he's doing it this way, and you're like, oh, okay, that's an interesting. Or no, he's playing it exactly how we thought. That's what it's trying to do. Okay, we've got it right there.
Makes sense.
And then I have one question more as a captain. How much would you estimate you needed to spend of your time to actually prepare for the event? Like since let's cut off a date, like since Nephilim. Like on average weekly.
Oh, so much time with Nephilim as well. It was so much time because of all the changes. I mean, luckily, I think you touched on it earlier, Typhus. What we do now within the England squad is we effectively split the captaincy up and delegate roles. I mean, if you will, actually, Tony and I are joint captains. The WDC doesn't really recognize that quite in that way, but that's sort of how we run it anyway. Mm-hmm. So we do split a number of the roles. So he does a lot more of the community side, organization on that side, and then it lets me focus on more the army building pairings, and then within that, I try not to do it all myself because you just burn out. I try and get other input. So Robbo's done a lot of pairing matrices before when he's been involved with other teams. So he brought fresh input into our group. So we bounce ideas off each other. But yeah, I try and in the past, I tried to run it all and it just got too much. So now we do delegate. So even though officially, is it me or Tony as a captain? We view it as a joint captaincy, and we have our roles, and we bounce ideas off each other, of course. But we go, this is what we're doing. He focuses on these aspects. I do these, and then we might delegate to some of the coaches. This is what you're in charge of, because otherwise there's just too much work for one person to manage. So when Nephilim dropped, I think we would all try to be, depending on people's availability. So a number of our players, for example, are teachers. So they had more availability, so they could do a lot more of the brunt of the work to prepare for Nephilim. Whereas other people who were, well, I've taken my holiday as the WTC, and I've taken a few extra days for the practice events. But outside of that, I'm full on with work. We try to then find that balance. And then for me, doing the pairings on top. And then I think, how long did we have? Was it 2 or 3 weeks from?
I think it was 3 weeks till the
Yeah,
list
3 weeks.
update.
That was a bit of a. That was a. I don't think I did much other than work and 40K for those 3 weeks. It seemed to be. I had either team calls, multiple days during the week, individual calls with different players to discuss different armies, weekend games, evening games to try and test ideas. Yeah, it was nuts. I'd definitely rather not be in that situation, but we seem to always end up in that situation with the date that the WTC is.
Over and over again.
Yes, yeah.
And looking back at this year's event, not more on the like organization side, but like your team's performance and how you guys approach stuff, what would you guys change and what you were like really unhappy about that you would change?
Yeah, so I think, and I mean, I've mentioned it now a few times. I think with the Nephilim change, and we had a few army changes. I think people did put effort in practice and got as many games as they could, but there was still were their matrices as spot on as they could have been? No, there was definitely players where their matrix was not, because there was too much theory still in the matrix, and that's always a risky proposition because until you've actually put it on table and you've actually played it, theory only goes so far, and there was certainly too much theory for my liking within the matrix this year with some of the late changes we made, and I am certain in certain rounds that cost us. So I think that's probably the only bit we'd be.
So even more prep.
Well, even more prep, but it's how you do that prep in such a short space of time. I think that's the difficult bit, isn't it?
You need to sacrifice your own life.
For us, it's been a matter of getting like systems in place beforehand, right? Like the Team USA issue that we had going in is that a lot of us weren't playing like TTS together or things like that, so we didn't have a lot of ways to enforce team cohesion for things like practice going in. So even if we threw 100 man hours at it, it didn't matter because we weren't together, and there was only so much to be taken from that. For us, it's been a matter of like setting up systems now, so that come February, June, like next year, we're not like, how do we do this from scratch?
Yes, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Because otherwise, as you say, there's throwing man hours will help, but if they're not used efficiently, it's never going to work that well. You need to be efficient with your time and get that practice in, because it's as we say, it's such a different setup. If you're used to playing singles with a win-loss draw system on different terrain, you naturally your amount of, if you've had a player that's played an army all year and they've played lots of games on WTC terrain with the 20-0 system, it is much easier for them to adapt to, okay, there's been some changes in Nephilim. Certain armies are a bit stronger, certain armies are a bit weaker, but I've played all those armies multiple times with my army in the setup that I need to play it in.
Right.
It's a much more easy adaptation for them to then adjust their matrix, adjust their numbers, because they've got the man hours in, they've got the reps in on their list. Whereas if you're changing to a list late, you don't have that. It's more theory. There is just a big risk of it going wrong.
Yeah, you're definitely using a lot more guesswork than knowledge at that point.
Yes, yeah.
And if you were to give like one advice for future new captains and people attending next year's WTC, what would be your advice, Josh?
I think for me, it is getting people to play on the terrain with the scoring system. That is the biggest thing. Until players click with that system, it doesn't matter how good a singles player they are. If they only are used to win, loss, draw, they will get caught out at the WTC. They'll go into games thinking this is how the game's going to go, and then you're like, that's not how it's going to go, because that's not how people are going to play against you. So for me, that's the biggest one. And even veteran players still can make that mistake sometimes. I think a good example would be for me, and he still scored very well for us, so he didn't do badly. He did well, but even me, for example, is Manny took sisters this year for us, and he went to I think 3 or 4 singles events before the event with sisters. He got loads of games in with them, and I think he won every event he went to with sisters, and he was smashing people with sisters. But then at the WTC, lots of people went, oh, the sisters score really well on their secondaries, but they have a 24-inch threat zone. I'm just going to sit out of that threat zone, score as many points as I can, and he's going to win 12-8. And I think in singles, a player won't do that because they lose 12-8. It doesn't. They lose. They've got 0 points. And even veteran players like Manny, he's been to multiple ETCs now, and he went, oh, and then I was like, yeah, but they won't play that way in that system using that scoring system. So you have to play on terrain like the WC with a scoring system that reflects the WC to really understand your army. Otherwise, you're still making guesswork. So I think that would be my one advice. If you're building a new team or a new captain, new players, play as many games as you can on the terrain with the scoring system you can, and that will put you in a much better position than just going off singles results.
Okay, I have only one closing question left, so maybe Anthony, you have something on your mind?
Not offhand. Let me think about that while you go through yours.
Okay, so while Anthony is thinking, which is clearly always difficult task to him,
it's so hard.
We've played, I know.
Yeah.
So, Josh, is there like anything that you would like to say to your thing? Say to your thing. I'm clearly doing great as well. Say to your team like closing notes before Anthony ask you a question. If they are listening, maybe you have some words of encouragement or scolding or anything.
No, I mean, I think from our side this year, it's been for this year's selection. Of course, we've not picked our team yet, but it's been fantastic that we try and encourage. The UK scene is a big tournament scene, even though we're quite a small country. We have some huge 40k events now, and there's more and more people are now looking at the WTC and I want to be involved with the WTC, who do very well on singles and want to get now involved, whereas before they maybe didn't consider the WTC an event to chase or go for. So like this year we've had Vic apply, we've had Nassim apply, who've both been doing very, very well on the scene. In like last year, Vic had thought about applying, but then said, no, I want to focus on singles because that's what I want to do. Whereas this year he's much more engaged with, no, I really want to go to the WTC. He wants to try and win it, of course. But that's great from our side is that, as I said right at the beginning, it's always a balancing act between picking veteran players who have experience, but we want new blood to challenge those veterans because they stagnate if you don't have good players challenging and upsetting that status quo and saying, no, I'm good enough to be on this team. I should be on this team, and making an unrefutable case to be selected. That's what I want players to do, and I'm sure you've had it, Typhus, when you've been doing selection. It's horrible sometimes when you have to tell a player that probably deserves to be on the team, you haven't made it, but that's also as a captain to try and go and win the WTC, that's the best problem to have, in that if I've got 10, 12 plus players I could pick and I've only got 8 slots, that's much better than I've got 6 players to pick and then where do I find 2 more from? So for sure, I think that's the great thing that's been for this year is that the amount, because the WTC, I think the swapping from the ETC to the WTC has boosted its presence. I mean, I think Neil and Tom have done a lot of work to make it much more visible in the community. I think there's now a genuine interest within the UK scene to go to the WTC and be involved. I mean, at the moment, we've cut our applications down to 16 players at the moment, and we're selecting from those 16. But they're all great applicants, and I can make an argument for all 16 to have a place, and that's a great position to be in as a captain. So I think that's the great news from me, is that to my team, they're all trying to prove they should be having that spot, and that's what I want. So I'm very happy.
So I noticed, Anthony, that you hidden yourself.
Yeah, I had a bit of an internet issue there, so I
Surprise.
think I'm back.
Not like Josh doesn't have a camera for the whole podcast because of that.
Yeah,
yeah.
No,
we just
no,
lagged all the way
internet
through our chat
problem.
when my camera was on. So
So do you have any question on the closing notes?
What would be, so you gave us advice about playing, right? What would be your biggest piece of like mental attitude, like at the event or before the event? Because I think the thing I noticed a lot from a bunch of teams is that they would have something go like a little bit sideways and then like have breakdowns along either like lines of communication or attitude or like focus levels going throughout the event. So how would you, like, what advice would you give to like especially like a first time attendee?
yeah, so I think that's a really good question, actually, because the getting into, as we talked about with the playing, is when you're playing in singles, your result only affects you. If you make a mistake, oh well, I've lost a game, I'll just carry on, it's the next game. It's you've not affected 7 other players that are you've said, oh, I'm going to get this score. You've not maybe got that score, and then you feel like you've let down the rest of your team. So I think, as Typhus said earlier, that also that mental aspect, the pressure, some players crumble under that, some players thrive and they're very good at it. So we do from our side, in that I try and talk to all my players about that. If they're veterans, they've already got that experience, but new players, I try to get them to understand that a result doesn't necessarily mean a win. So you getting a result for the team can be getting 2 or 3 points when we thought you'd get 0, or getting it, fighting for every point matters. Even if a game that was going well starts to go wrong, conserving as many points as you can rather than just going for a Hail Mary to keep the score you thought you was going to get, and then actually it all tumbles and you go from a really positive game to a negative game. That's a completely different change in mindset. And then one of the things I work with our coaches is I try and get them to be mindful about giving me feedback as they're sort of running the row, if you will. They're getting score predictions from each player, so we can know who to tell to push, who to tell to hold the game and just see out the result they're getting. I also try to get them to look at the mental game for each player, and where has somebody's head dropped, has somebody's is somebody getting frustrated in a game, what's happening, and then we try and, as a group, make sure we deal with that as a group. So if somebody's head goes down, if the next round we reset, how do we perk them up again? How do we get them feeling positive? Because, as I said, if somebody's head goes and then you let their head stay gone, and particularly if then team members turn on each other and start blaming each other for a loss, then your next round you're probably going to lose as well, because you've already lost. Your team's not working cohesively anymore. And then you're not going to recover. Then you're probably never going to recover. So actually, we try and explain it to new players and get them to understand that. Also, sometimes losing a game but getting some points is actually a bigger result than the guy who was expected to get a big win getting his big win. He's just delivered what he was supposed to get. You've actually overachieved. That, for the team, that's worth, it's not worth more, but it's almost worth more for the team than the expected result. So celebrate
like more points.
Yeah, celebrate that result. And I think once players get into that mindset where, actually, even if my matchup prediction was a bad matchup, but I managed to scrape a few more points, that's a win. Then they don't feel like, because we've had players before that have gone to the event, their role is a put forward early, and you're like, we expect you to lose every game. That's your and some players, either their ego can't take that, or they just can't accept that. Am I going to be put under the? We would say put under the bus. They're gonna take the bus for every round. But if you lose all 7 games or 6 games, however many we end up playing next year, but you get like 7, 8 points every round out of, say, a first.
Oh, you're a hero.
Yeah,
that guy's a champion.
Forward.
Yeah.
You've scored phenomenally well.
Yep.
So it's getting people to understand that mindset, and then, as I said, we then try and work with our coaches to make sure if anybody's head does start to drop or there's any issues, as a team, we try and lift them back up again and make sure that they know there's no judgment. We can have a full debrief after the event and discuss issues there, but in the event we don't dwell on it, because we've got to reset for the next round. And go again, because particularly with an event like the WTC, the interesting thing is with 7 games last time, wasn't it? Because we had the pod. You could have lost a round and still won the event, because you think, oh, there's this many players. Well, actually, no, because they're 8-man teams. It's actually not much. It's no different from 30? How many teams were there? 31, 32, something like that, or maybe less.
28. There were.
So in singles terms, we played a 7-round, 28-man event, which makes no sense from a singles point of view. You would not need 7 rounds to determine a winner for 28 players. So,
but I think you could look at it like 5 rounds. Like the pod was 1 round. That's how I.
Yes, sure. But even you don't, for 28 players, you don't even need 5 rounds, do you?
You perfectly need 5 rounds, actually.
Yeah.
Then it makes more sense.
So it's one of those that you can get. But say for you guys, you drew against Belgium, didn't you? So you guys drew
round
to Belgium, round 1.
Get out of the way early.
But actually, you were still fighting for the win right at the end, even though you drawn around. So I think that's the other thing we try and explain to players, is that they see the number of people at the event, but actually, when you've got that many games, having 1 round not quite go your way doesn't mean that you're out of the running at all. You can still podium, still do well. So you've got to get your head back up again and go into the next round, trying to get that result. Because if you let your head drop and it's gone, then it's done.
That's it. Cool. Awesome. Great answer.
So,
Typhus, anything else?
No, I just wanted to do my due diligence whether Josh wants to plug something.
Yes.
No, I don't work for anybody in that respect. So I'm freelance effectively. But
if you've got is there like a place people can go to follow Team England, like a sports team that you want to?
Yeah, so I mean, we do have we have our community page on Facebook where anybody can join and follow what we're doing, and then through that you can get in touch with us. And then we have like a private squad page where people who are interested in being involved get invited to, where we can discuss more ideas openly. But yeah, for anybody, they want to come and see what we're doing, please follow our community page, message us. And then we also say, if anybody wants to get involved with Team England, or even just wants to chat to us, even if they don't want to get involved, we're at most of the big UK events. There'll be somebody there. A lot of them will have Team England shirts, because on purpose this year, for last year's events with team funding, I bought all the shirts for everybody, but I insisted they had to keep one. They couldn't swap away all of them. So they have to have it. So at least each of the team members from last year for sure will all have an England shirt, and they normally wear it at one of the days at an event anyway. So look out for one of our shirts, come chat to somebody. Because even if you don't want to play or you don't think you're at that level yet, we're always looking for, when we do practice weekends, if it's just the 8 players that want to play, you can't necessarily get all the games in you want to get in. So we always want more people involved. Even if you just want to get involved with play some more games, do some practicing, understand how team events work, get involved with from that side, and then maybe in the future you might decide, yes, now I want to play. But we're always welcoming people to get involved and have a chat with us.
Oh, my internet's freaking out. Can you hear me?
Yes,
I think we're good.
Yes, I think
Alright,
that's
cool.
the time for your closing part.
Yes. So, is it back? Okay, I think we're good. All right. So, oh man, it's gonna fight me. All right, I think
You're
we're good.
perfectly
Okay.
fine. Like I can hear you clearly.
Yeah, it was showing in and out like you were freezing, so I could tell it was going bad, but I think we're good now. So thank you guys again for watching. Thank you, Josh, for being on. Thank you, Typhus, for joining me. This has been another episode of Enter the Matrix for Team England on the Stat Check Network. I'm sure there's links in the description. Click them so you guys can show us some support, like, subscribe, all the usual YouTube advertisement stuff. Thank you again. Have a good night.